everybody. My name is Catherine Uroff, and I'm reading my short story, Connecticut Was Closing. It was published in the latest Moon City Review. Excited to share it with you guys. Connecticut was closing. Our last day of work was on Halloween, and that was why we didn't notice Stuart coming into the office with a machete. A lot of us were dressed up for the day. Tammy King from accounting was wearing a saggy Donald Trump face mask and what looked to be a big cloth diaper pinned to her jeans. Johnny McDonald in receiving came as the Cowardly Lion. Our receptionist, Tricia, dressed up as Cruella de Vil. I was a nun in a long black habit. We were just doing what we'd done every year, showing up in costume for the lunchtime parade, where we'd weave around the tables in the cafeteria to be judged by a group of executives in categories like most creative, best overall, scariest. Our prizes were always something with the company logo on it: emergency car kits, mini flashlights, mouse pads. But that day, there was no contest because the office was closing for good. Everything was moving to the new headquarters in Huntsville, Alabama. There were tax benefits. That was how it was explained to us. Alabama was providing an incentive package worth millions in exchange for the company making capital investments in the state. None of us were getting any severance. If you wanted to work in Alabama, you still had a job, but Connecticut was closing. On that last day, there were workshops on resume writing and networking, but some of us skipped out early and went to the Chinese buffet across the street for lunch. There was Bob, Sue from the mailroom, Danny, and Heather, who was younger than the rest of us and thought that living in the South would be fun. Heather was the only one of us who still had a job. Bob couldn't move because he'd just gotten married, and all of his wife's family lived in the Hartford area, and they'd be damned if they were going to let Bob move her anywhere. It was Bob's second marriage, and he wanted to do right by his wife. "I won't fuck this one up," he told me the day he came back from his honeymoon on the Cape. Sue had just moved her mother into a home for Alzheimer's patients, so Alabama wasn't even a consideration for her. She gained 20 pounds in 6 months after her mother was lost for 12 hours before being found behind the McDonald's on Clifton Avenue, trying to lift herself up and into the garbage dumpster. Danny wasn't moving either. "I'm not a dog, and I won't be chasing my tail," he'd said to me when we first heard the news. At the Chinese restaurant, we had second helpings at the buffet, gorging ourselves on slimy noodles, dry chunks of sesame chicken, greasy egg rolls. We didn't talk to each other too much, and right before the check came, Sue started to cry and Bob offered to get her meal. She dabbed her eyes with her paper napkin and thanked him. She'd worked for the company for 23 years. "You're a good man, Bob," I said. He was wearing a cowboy hat and leather chaps, and he'd kept his hat on throughout the meal. "We're all good people. That's why this shouldn't be happening to us," Sue said. "Since when has that ever mattered?" Danny asked. "I feel uncomfortable," Heather said, "with all this sadness. I feel like I don't belong." "It'll happen to you too someday. Don't think it won't," Bob said. "Let's not turn on each other. Not today," I said. "Always the peacemaker," Danny said, looking at me. We had a history together, but I couldn't always tell what he was thinking. Bob threw his napkin on his plate, and we watched it get dark, soaked by the soy sauce that was pooled on his plate. "I think this is over," he said. After lunch, I caught Stuart coming out of the third-floor men's bathroom. He was wearing a pinstripe three-piece suit and a hockey mask that looked to be smeared with fake blood. I could see him smile at me through the mask's birdcage. Even though his pants legs were too short and his tie was clown-shaped wide, I thought he looked great. I assumed he was making a statement about how corporate America was really just a horror show. I was actually going to congratulate him on his creativity. "If we were having a contest, you'd definitely place." But then I noticed the machete dangling down from his right hand. How could I have missed it in the first place? The deadliness and danger in its long, curved, black blade. It clearly wasn't some prop that he'd gotten from Party City. It was the real thing, and he looked to have a comfortable grip on it as he let it swing a little in his hand. "Hey, Stuart," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's up?" Stuart worked in another department, maybe billing? I wasn't sure. Sometimes I'd run into him in the break room and he'd grouse about traffic while waiting for a fresh pot of coffee to finish percolating. His father had died unexpectedly a few years back, and a lot of people from work went to the funeral home in Essex to pay their respects. I didn't go. I had a date with Danny that night. "Hello, how are you?" Don't worry, this won't involve you." His tone was very pleasant. He could have been talking to me about the weather, his plans for the weekend, a car he was thinking of buying. "Now, Stuart, this isn't a good idea." I wanted to be calm and soothing, like the therapist I saw after Danny and I broke up. After I cried so loudly one night that my landlord, Mr. Doucette, banged on my door because he thought I was being raped. The therapist advised me to quit my job. She said that I needed to find another place to work away from Danny, begin the healing process, she suggested. I did try to follow her advice. I interviewed for a job with Cigna and they offered me a position as an underwriter, but when it came time to quit, I just couldn't. Instead, I skipped my next 2 therapy appointments and then stopped going altogether. Stuart just flashed me a grim smile and brushed right by me. He headed towards the east wing, a corner of the floor that was reserved for the executives and was nicer than the rest of the building, with its wood-paneled walls, spacious offices with built-ins, boardrooms with all the latest video conferencing technology. I ducked into the major accounts department and rushed towards some people who were standing by the copier. "Help," I whispered, because I didn't want Stuart to hear me. "We need to leave now." Everyone reacted very quickly. They didn't act surprised at all, as if they'd just been waiting for some kind of crisis to unfold. We swarmed out of the department. One of the women, Sheila, who handled operations, shrieked because Stuart was at the far end of the hallway by that time, and he was using his machete to neatly slice off the top of a snake plant in the corner. And then he swung at one of the posters hanging on the wall, the one with the company motto on it, "Let us help you secure your future," and also knocked off the TV monitor next to it, the one that was used to advertise the cafeteria's lunch menu and the names of employees who were celebrating milestone anniversaries. Just a month before, my name had been displayed for having 15 years. After I guided the major accounts people toward the stairwell, I tried to round up other people on the floor. I found Danny in the break room, standing in front of the empty vending machine, staring at all the bare shelves where the snack-sized bags of potato chips and Fritos used to be. When I told him that Stuart had lost his shit and had brought a knife to work and that I needed his help in getting people out, he didn't hesitate. He said that he'd handle the second floor. By that time, other people on the floor had heard the news and were streaming out of their departments to leave. I rushed down the hallway and saw some of the women from the Global Client Services team waiting at the elevator. They had their jackets on and purses hooked over their arms like it was any other day. By this time, we couldn't see Stuart anymore, but we could hear crashing sounds coming from the executive area. I screamed at the GCS women to take the stairs. One lady wobbled, and I had to cradle her so that she wouldn't fall. Her pale tongue slipped out of her mouth, and I tried to think of her name because she was a woman whom I'd seen every day for years in the ladies' room, washing her hands at the sinks after stepping out of a stall, but I'd never really spoken to her. "Please, we have to go now," I said to her, and she stiffened up in my arms and was able to stand again. On the first floor, I slammed my hands on cubicle walls. I put my fingers in my mouth and whistled. I flicked overhead lights off and on. One fellow was actually sleeping at his desk. His monitor had gone into screensaver mode, 3 primary colored balls morphing into each other. I shook him by the shoulder until he snapped awake. "What now?" he asked. Then I saw the red fire alarm box on the wall next to the light switch, and I grabbed it so hard that my nails broke as I pulled down.